G'day, this is Riley.
And Grace from Opals.
You know, one of the most common questions we get is about dopping opals. It seems simple, but there's a lot of very small parts to it that can make it tricky. And I have never found a really good source where you can just go and learn everything that you need to know about dopping opals. So I'm going to try to put everything that I possibly can, all the tips and tricks that I know about dopping opals, into one video so that you can sit down and have a look through, and maybe just watching me do it will help you with your own dopping.
Okay.
We also have a very cool thermal camera, so we're going to look at some of the heating aspects. Alright, by way of introduction, I should probably just cover what is dopping. Dopping is just simply taking your opal and sticking it on a stick. If you only have one or two opals, this is probably going to have way too much information for you. You just need to take a dot of super glue and stick it on your stick, hold it for 90 seconds, and then you're good to go. If, however, you're trying to up your game and you want to get 40, 50, 60 opals a day dopped, then let's get started, and there's probably going to be a lot of stuff in here, hopefully, that can help you out. First of all, we're going to cover tools, so we're going to go over everything that I use. Some tools are pretty common and ordinary for dopping, some are not, so we're going to go over each of them in detail. The lamp that I use, the sticks that I use, the wax, what kind of wax, the tweezers that I use, how I hack those tweezers in order to help me speed things up, and the bench block that I use. Once we cover that, we'll go on to the process. And I'll try to put links down below so that if you want to go back and look at particular aspects to it, you can go straight to it. And that's going to include setting up your Dopstick, setting up your stone, making sure it's ready before you put it on the Dopstick, shaping your wax, heating the stone, how we stick the stone to the stick, taking it off of the stick, and how we mount it backwards for cutting the back of the stone. One other last thing in housekeeping here: we don't make any money off of our YouTube videos, and probably never will. So please do us a favor. If you like these videos and you want to see more, just click the like down below and click on the bell so that you get future updates. It takes you no time, but it really helps us out a lot with our YouTube traffic and our traffic to our Opal auction stores. So if you could do that for us, it'd be awesome. Thank you so much. Alright, let's get started. Alright, tools. Number one, your lamp. In order to melt the wax, you need some kind of fire source. This is what I used to use whenever I started, the humble tea candle. They're cheap. You can buy them in huge bags at your grocery store, and they work perfectly fine. The drawback is you can't get a big flame on them if you need a big flame on them. If you're cutting big stones, that's kind of a pain, and that's why I moved to an alcohol lamp. These are the two most common types of alcohol lamps. This is the one that I used for 6 or 7 years, and this is the one that replaced it. Both of them are good lamps, but some of them have some drawbacks. So let's go over this one first. This one has a crank on it that is no longer here, so it has a moving part, and that moving part is broken. So it's one of the reasons that I don't still use this. The moving part is what cranks the wick up and down. It also has a very small cap on it that isn't particularly good at keeping the alcohol in the lamp. So I noticed that when I was using this lamp, you just have to feed it a lot of alcohol. Both of them I've used all kinds of different spirits in, and I found that isopropyl alcohol is the best. This is the isopropyl alcohol that I used for years and years. There is one major drawback to this lamp, and besides the crank being really fiddly and having to fight the wick a lot of the times, is that if you fill it up high and you have it on its side like this, it can leak. And one day it did leak because I filled it up nice and high, and I ignited it before I let everything evaporate, and it nearly blew my shop up. So I had to get the hose out, and I was hosing my shop down. And after that I said, no more, I'm going to try a different one. And then I got this one, and I love this little lamp. There's no moving parts in it. The wick advance is manual, and it has a really nice glass cap, makes a lovely sound, and it doesn't I don't think it leaks alcohol as much. Any alcohol lamp you have is going to leak alcohol, and that's just part of using an alcohol lamp. But I really like this one. You can't put it on its side, but I don't use it on my side anyway. It has an adjustable wick. It's manually adjustable, but you can make the flame really big or really small. It does have one little drawback in that if you use them all day, every day, The glue that they use sometimes doesn't hold this cap on, but you know, you just use a little lapidary glue or whatever and put it back on there, and it's no problem. Hands down, this is the lamp that I prefer. Like I said, I do use isopropyl alcohol, and this is just one little hint. This is a 500ml bottle for my Australian cutters. You can get these at Bunnings for $27, and for years I just bought one of these, but you burn through them pretty quickly. You can also get from Sydney Solvents a 5-liter delivered to your door for about $35. So if you're going to be cutting a lot of stones, get a big thing of alcohol. You can also use it for cleaning purposes around the house and cleaning your glasses or whatever. It's pretty handy to have around. And Sydney Solvents or you know, some of the big industrial suppliers, super cheap, and they deliver. Tool number 2, the Dopstick. You know, I have this really clear memory the first day I got my arbor in, and I wasn't used to cutting things on sticks, or if it was just, you know, a big stick off a tree or whatever. And I remember walking around going, well, what am I going to use for the stick? And I ended up, I think I ended up using some chopsticks that day. And then, you know, I've gone through all kinds of different sticks, and I eventually just got this dowel. You know, I went to the hardware store and got these dowels and cut them into some lengths. And I used these dowels for years, and they were perfectly fine. But whenever I transitioned from cutting as a hobby cutter to cutting as a commercial cutter, I wanted to experiment with some different sticks because I wanted to speed up the process. And I tried all kinds: big stick, little sticks, long sticks, short sticks, anything that you can imagine. Sticks out of hardwood. This is the stick that I ended up with. This is a bamboo skewer. You buy them in huge packs. Not all bamboo skewers are created equal. Some of them are very thin, maybe 1.7 mil. Some of them are thicker, you know, that are too thick. The ones that work the best, I found, are these. They're 2.5 to 2.7 millimeters in diameter, and they give just a little bit of flex. So whenever you're up against your Nova wheel, you have a little bit of push on it if you need it, or if you're up against your hard wheel, but not so much that it changes the angle of the stone on the wheel, just enough to give it a little bit of pressure. And one of the things that I did find out whenever you're cutting a lot of stones is it's really helpful if your sticks are all exactly the same. So, you know, when I started, I had all kinds of stuff. You know, I'd use nails, I'd use these dowels, you know, I had all kinds of stuff, and it didn't really matter. If you're cutting a few stones, it really doesn't matter. But if you're going to cut 90 stones a day, if you have exactly the same sticks so that you don't have to adjust your brain to go, okay, well, I have to adjust my hands this way for the long stick and this way for the short stick, that's really, really helpful in helping you increase the amount of stones that you can cut per day. It gives you less to think about. The more thinking that you can take out of that process, the more you can focus on the things that you have to think about. So things like how long the stick is are really important. Now, the second part about having a smaller stick that not many people think about is that whenever you're using a larger stick and you're spinning that stick, it takes a lot more movement to create a single rotation of that stone. And the effect that has is when you're on the Nova wheels, it makes it harder for you to take your facets out. So for every one turn of this dowel stick, whenever I move to the bamboo stick, for that same movement of my fingers, I get 3 full rotations of the stone. And that really fast spinning of the stone is what lets you take the facets out of your stone so easily. And especially if you're on a Nova wheel and you're putting just a little bit of pressure on it, that pressure with that speed will just erase those facets. So, you know, I used to just spend all kinds of time just, you know, back and forth and rubbing it with these larger sticks, trying to take those last little facets out between the 230 and the 280 wheel. If you have a smaller stick, those facets are 10 times easier. That was this moving from this stick to this stick. It doesn't look like much, but that was the single biggest move, the single most important thing that I did that allowed me to increase the amount of stones that I could cut in a day. It's just moving from this stick to this stick. It doesn't look like much, but the speed that you can cut 3 times faster with that stick. Tip number 1, huge tip: use the right stick. spend the time to find the stick. These bamboo sticks have ridges that run up and down so they don't slip when you spin, which is also really helpful. If you use, I had the same diameter stick out of balsa, out of hardwood. You can go to the hardware store and buy them. They're not as good as the bamboo because the sticks that are mass produced out of hardwoods don't have those ridges in them, and once they're wet they can get slippery. So these ridges are really helpful in helping you turn that stick and having the stick stick to your fingers whenever it's spinning around. This is the stick. Tool number 3, and the most important part of this process, is the dopping wax. There are a lot of different types of dopping wax, and I've had people ask me, can I use beeswax or can I use candle wax? Not the same thing. Dopping wax is specific wax that has, most of it has shellac in it, which is a tacky sticking agent that they mix in with the wax that makes it sticky. Dopping wax is melted at different temperatures. Black wax and brown wax are usually for faceting, so I wouldn't suggest that. If you live in really hot climates, you can get away with using red wax, but anytime you have winters that are going to get cold, the red wax won't hold on to the stone. So I suggest green dopping wax. Green dopping wax melts at 65 degrees centigrade or 149 degrees in Fahrenheit, and all green waxes are not made the same. Some of them smell like plastic, some of them smell nice and like pine. The kind that we sell in our Opal auction shop is my favorite kind of wax. It has a nice kind of piney smell, and I'm going to be taking you through what happens at different temperatures with this wax and how you can tell what temperature it is by how it looks and what you do at those different temperatures. So if you want to use the same wax that I'm using in these videos, or if you're not getting the same results from your wax that I get from my wax, and you want to try this, I've got it on our Opal auction shop. Tool number 4, your tweezers. Now, I used this set of tweezers for years and years before I ever found these, but once I found these, I'd never go back. These are cross-locking tweezers, or sometimes you call them soldering tweezers. After I rub the stones off during the first stage, where I'm dopping them for the first time, I always use these. Now, you remember how I said anything that you can do to take the thinking out of the process is going to help you speed things up? Well, these take the thinking out of the process. With these, you have to always think about the pressure that you're putting on, and sometimes they slip or whatever. With these, you just lock them on there, and then they're there until you want the tweezers to let go of them. They're cheap. Invest in a pair of these. They don't cost very much money, and they save you a lot of time, and they get rid of a lot of unnecessary thinking. These, however, are for whenever you are doing the backs of your stone. You can't use cross-locking tweezers when you're doing the backs of your stone because you're working with a cabochon. And if you pinch a cabochon, and the cabochon is very, very smooth, then you essentially have a rocket, and your stone will across your shop, and you'll spend the rest of the time looking under things. Don't use these for doing the backs. You need these. Now, if you look, just get a really cheap pair of tweezers. These are super cheap. And what I've done is I've taken a file to the very end right here, and I've filed a little bit on the bottom and a little bit on the top so that whenever I grab a stone, it kind of just fits. It nests in there just perfectly. If you don't do that, well, then they're going to kind of want to shoot out sometimes because they're going to be really slick whenever you're doing the backs of them. So this tweezer hack number 1 is get a cheap pair of tweezers, not any diamond tweezers or anything like that, and then take your Dremel or a little needle file and just file a little groove in there that'll fit a 2 or 3 carat stone just perfectly, and that'll work for most anything that you do. Tool number 5. This is the single most important tool, and I've never seen anybody use one of these when they're dopping. This is a jeweler's bench block. They're very heavy. It's 3/4 inch steel, 4 inches by 4 inches. It's essentially an anvil, a bench block, and it helps you control the wax on the stick. And I'm going to teach you how to use this in ways you've probably never seen anybody else use one of these when they're dopping. But in terms of increasing the amount of stones that I can do in a day, besides getting the Dopstick exactly right, this is the single most important thing, switching to using a bench block, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. Go on eBay. I've seen them. They're like $20. Incredibly good investment. Number 6, the last thing you're going to need is an old metal spoon or something that you can melt the wax in. Something that's metal. You're going to put a candle or your lamp underneath it, and it needs to be able to get up to 80 or 90 degrees, hot enough to melt that wax. Now that we've covered the tools, we'll start on the process side of this demonstration. The process 1 is setting up your Dopstick. I've got my spoon just essentially glued to my desk and the alcohol lamp underneath. And we put it underneath, and after a minute or 2 it starts to get to this state. And you can start by just twirling the stick around and loading the wax up onto the stick. Once it's loaded, you can start to spin it on your bench block, and it might need a little reheating. And then you can spin it more, putting a little bit of pressure down to make sure that that wax is pushed into the wood. Alright, here are 3 versions of stones that I would see on Dopsticks. 2 of these are not properly prepared at all, so this is just essentially a rough piece. That's the way it comes from the mine. And sometimes people will just say, okay, well, there's a flat part here, I'm just going to stick the Dopstick on that and get going. This is another one. This is a lot of times I just see the stick just whacked on there and then off they go. And this is one that I've prepared. This is what my stones look like whenever they come out of the rubbing state. They'll have basic pre-shape. They'll be parallel. The face and the back will be parallel. Look like a little chip like that. This is a properly prepared stone. These, not so much. So much of the problem that I see in people trying to cut perfect opals is they don't start out in a way that lets them cut them perfectly. If you start out with something like that on a stick, it's going to make it really, really hard for you to end up with a perfect opal in the end. There's just too many things going on, too much to think about. Okay, once your stone has been rubbed out and prepared right, there's one other step that you can do before you start the dopping that is going to help you, and that is to get a template and to draw the stone that you want to cut on that stone, the shape that you want to cut on the stone. Once you have it drawn, if you draw a dot in the center of the mass, that will help you center your stone on your stick. Now this is a lot of wastage. I would normally pick a bigger one, but this is just an example of what that looks like. One other trick here is that if you try to draw a black line on a black stone, it's really, really hard to see. So for my black opals, I use a tent stake. This is an aluminum tent stake that I've just sharpened up, and whenever you draw a template on a stone with an aluminum tent stake, once you get that wet, it's really easy to see. Number 3 is shaping the wax on the bench block. Now, I want to form a nice little cone on the tip of this stick. And why I use a bench block is it allows me to do this. It allows me to catch the wax on the edge of the block and push that wax towards the front of the stick. And I reheat it, and I form this little cone on the tip of the stick. All this without ever having touched the wax. Now, because it's raised, I can put the back of the stick down below the face of the anvil or the bench block, which gives me that perfect little cone shape. Once it's shaped, I can push it down a little bit to tell how much wax is forward of the end of the stick. Now that's almost a centimeter. That's way too much. So that's how I tell how much wax there is there. So I warm it up and push it back, and warm it up again, and start to shape it. Now I'm pushing down and forward on that wax so that it pulls back on the stick just a little bit. Now the wax is just about ½ a centimeter past the end of the stick. That's just perfect. So for the first stage, I'm just going to get it so that the wax is malleable. That's this stage. Okay, that's the wax up to 65 to 70 degrees. Okay. This green wax melts or becomes malleable at 65 degrees, so heating it just over that point allows you to shape the wax on the block. So the stages are when it becomes so that you can just shape it. It is 65 degrees. Whenever it becomes so pliable that it'll bend, that's 100 degrees. That's about as hot as you ever want to get this wax. The next stage is when it starts to bubble, and that is 130 degrees. You never really want to get this wax that hot. That's where it'll start to burn you. If you do this properly, you never really have to protect your fingers with a lot of water because you never get it up to that stage. And then the last stage before it all goes undone is the smoke stage. That's here. And that is 150 or 160 degrees. You never want to get your wax up to that. For one, it will make the wax, if you do it too many times, it'll make the wax not sticky anymore. And two, there's just no real reason to ever get it that hot. Alright, so the temperature you want is right where it starts to get glossy. Alright, so I've done it again, but it's about 80. It's about 80 degrees, so it's a little bit more than malleable, but not so much as bubbly. Now here it is in slow motion. Here's stage 1, no change. Stage 2, it gets glossy. Stage 3, it bubbles. Stage 4, it steams. It happens really, really quickly. The best way to go through the stages and get it to the right part is just to wave it through the flame. I've just got it stuck in the flame here. Now this is boiling. You never ever want to get it that hot. Now we'll cover heating your opal, process number 5. Now you want to get this stone moist but not wet, and then hang it directly over the flame. You'll see the stone start to turn white, and as soon as it turns white, you pull it off of the flame, and that'll get you right up to about 110 to 120 degrees. This is the exact right temperature to stick the wax to the stone. Now this process does take a little bit more time than doing it from dry, but if you do it from a dry opal, you have no indication of how hot that stone is. You really just have to guess or have to know based on the size of the stone and knowing your flame really well. But if you start with a moist stone, you can always tell when it's at 110, 120 degrees, because whenever you look at it, that's the point at which it becomes white. Here it is again. Down, 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 3, 2, 1, bam. That's the point where you pull it off, and your stone's going to be the perfect temperature. Now the next process, number 6, is where we actually stick the stick to the stone to the stick. You heat your wax up and you heat your stone up, and then if you gently tap it just like this, you can see if the stone and the wax are hot enough. In this case, it's not. You should see it sticking better than that. So we'll hover the stone over the fire just a little bit more, warm the wax up, and give it another try. Now this time you can see when I drop the stick down, the wax sticks to the stone, so I know that both the wax and the stone are a perfect temperature. I put it down and I use my finger to push the wax down into the stone, making a nice little shoulder there. You don't want it to end in a sharp corner. You want it to gently run in a nice little cone all the way from the top of the wax down to where it meets the stone. Alright, so once the stone is on the stick, what you want to do is make sure that it's centered. Okay, so you see I've drawn that dot there in the center, and as I spin the stick, the dot goes in circles, right? So sometimes let's just pretend for some reason maybe there was sand in this edge or something like that. So sometimes this actually happens. You draw a circle where the stone is going to be, because there's these problem areas here or there, and the dot in the middle of the circle is it's kind of hard to center it because you're looking at both the shape of the stone, but you want not the shape of the stone centered, you want the dead center of what will be your finished cut opal directly above the shaft of the stick. And you can see here, because I've put a dot there, that that's not what's happening. As long as that dot's going around in a circle, when I spin it, then it's definitely not centered. So I've got to stick it above the flame for just a bit, just to soften that wax. You don't have to pull it off. You just now, after I've played around with it a little bit, I'm pretty happy with where it's centered. It's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be pretty close. And once it's centered, you want to look at it like this. And you want to make sure that it spins flat. Right now I'm looking at the bottom of the opal. It's not always the case that you look at the bottom of the opal, though. Sometimes you're looking, this is just a piece of potch, really common opal, but sometimes you have to adjust the spin for your color bar. So sometimes if you've pre-cut or done your rub just perfectly, you don't have to do this. But sometimes you know, you want the point at which your potch and your color bar meet to spin flat. And so sometimes you have to adjust it so that the opal's not actually spinning flat on the top. But most of the time, if you've done your rubbing correctly, what you're looking for is a position where the bottom of the opal spins perfectly flat. And you know, sometimes whenever you start, it's like this. Right? It doesn't spin flat, so you just have to start looking at the high side, and then spin it a little bit, and then spin it a little bit. You see that's a little high. I usually try to spin it like 45 degrees. And if that's a little high, I'll touch it down and I spin it 45 degrees and kind of rock it back and forth. And then eventually it spins perfectly flat. Now we're ready for cutting. Here's the first example of how not to do it. There's all kinds of issues with this. One, the stone hasn't been prepared properly, and two, there's way too much wax on this stick. Okay. This stone is too big, and so when you put any pressure on it, it just snaps off because it doesn't have any shoulder on it. Alright, so without a shoulder on a big stone like that, it's just going to snap off. Okay, this stone, it looks like it's balanced fairly nicely, but whenever you look at it in the center of the stone, and I put that dot in the center, you can see that when you spin it around, that dot moves around. If you put a dot in the center mass of your stone, you shouldn't have it doing circles like that. And this one is just not balanced. So you need to have your stone balanced. Right? Here's an example of a perfectly dopped stone. When I spin it around, it's balanced. It doesn't have much of a shoulder on it, but it's a small stone, so I don't need to. The wax has been pushed down into the stone so that it stays there, and it's nice and centered on the stick. Perfectly good stone there. Alright, process number 7 is removing the opals. This is the simplest part. You just need to put them in the freezer. Make sure that they're clean and dry. Make sure you wipe off all of the cerium before you put them in there. Leave them for about 10 minutes and then pull them out. It usually takes a minute or two for them to warm up before the opals will fall off, but as soon as they start warming up, they'll come off easily just by either falling off or you pulling them easily. Alright, so for this last part, everything is pretty much the same except for when I'm dopping the face, I don't get my stones wet. I put them in the flame and then you see some condensation. It frosts over just like that, and then you wait for that condensation to evaporate. This is in slow motion. This all happens really quickly, but if you look at it, it'll start evaporating around the edges, and then there you see it. It starts getting shiny and glossy, and it goes in a little bit more. That's 110 degrees, and you go 1, 2, that's about 120 degrees there.
With bigger stones, it takes a bit longer for the water to evaporate than it does with smaller stones. Now we're going to go through the whole process. First thing to do is put the shiny side up. Simple but effective. Now for the process at regular speed. Spinning the stone quickly here gets off all of the water so you can see it to balance it. Once the stone is balanced, swishing it in the water makes it so the wax cools down and won't move. If the wax goes over the edge, you can push it back nearer to the stick while it's still warm, like this. It's good to have quite a lot of Dopsticks, if you do loads, so that you can pick one with just the right amount of wax. See, in the corner we have our little bucket of wax there, very useful. Now we're using the block to push the wax forward back onto the front of the stick. With bigger stones, just dip your finger in a bit of water to stop them burning.